She didn't scream and didn't flinch when she found her husband floating face down in the Jordan River with stones in his pockets. She screamed and flinched when Jimmy Shelton, the charming surveyor she'd hired, went white as snow and told her to freeze, because the wooden crate she'd been leaning against for the past hour wasn't storage. It was a coffin waiting to happen. It was enough dynamite to erase her from existence.
Hello, compliments of the season. If you love heartwarming stories about life in times past, then you'd enjoy these stories. Comment where you're watching from, like and share these videos with loved ones as you enjoy them. Do not forget to subscribe to our channel too. My team and I have something free and beautiful for you once we hit the 1,000 subscriber mark. It will be shared in the community. You know, we go to great lengths to make these videos, and your support means a lot to us. Therefore, we plan to give back to you once we are able to, so be a part of what we are building.
She didn't scream when she found her husband's body in the Jordan River with stones in his pockets. She screamed when the charming surveyor she'd hired went pale and whispered, "Don't breathe," because the crate she'd been leaning against all morning wasn't storage. It was enough dynamite to erase her from existence. Tessy Hartfield had been a widow for 4 months, and in Salt Lake City, that was already long enough for folks to stop asking how she was holding up. But the way she rode into town that morning, spine straight, eyes forward, made even the gossiping churchwomen pause mid-sentence. She wasn't wearing black anymore. She was wearing her husband's old riding coat, and a look that said she had stopped asking for permission to exist. Her husband, Roland Hartfield, had drowned in the Jordan River on a Tuesday morning in July. They found him face down near the old mill with his pockets full of river stones. The marshal called it suicide. The banker called it unfortunate. The mining men who'd been circling Roland's silver claim near Big Cottonwood Canyon called it convenient. Tessy called it murder. But calling something what it is doesn't mean anyone will listen, especially when you're a woman in Utah territory and the men who might have killed your husband control half the claims between here and Park City. So Tessy stopped talking and started planning. She hired Jimmy Shelton 3 weeks ago, a mining surveyor with excellent references and a smile that could charm a rattlesnake into a Sunday hat. He arrived at her cabin outside Heber City on a clear September morning, tipping his hat like a gentleman, carrying leather satchels full of instruments she suspected he barely knew how to use. What Jimmy didn't know was that Tessy had spent the last 4 months reading her husband's private files that documented every grifter, con artist, and claim jumper working the Utah mining boom. And Jimmy Shelton's face was in those files, right next to a list of aliases longer than the territorial highway. Jimmy spread his maps across Tessy's kitchen table like a man who'd done this 100 times before, and he probably had. His fingers traced the property lines of her claim with practiced confidence, pointing out veins and fault lines with just enough technical language to sound legitimate. He explained how a few strategic improvements, some new survey markers and updated deed documentation could increase her claims value by thousands. All she had to do was sign a few papers giving him temporary authority to make those improvements on her behalf. Tessy poured him coffee and let him talk. She even nodded in the right places, playing the confused widow who needed a smart man to explain complicated things. Jimmy leaned back in his chair, getting comfortable, and that's when she saw it. The subtle shift in his posture that said he thought the hook was set. "Mr. Shelton," she said quietly, setting down the coffee pot. "Or should I call you James Fairweather? Or maybe Jack Sherman? Which name did you use in Nevada when you sold those phantom shares in the Comstock extension?" The color drained from Jimmy's face like water from a broken dam. His hand froze halfway to his coffee cup. Tessy walked to the cabinet and pulled out a leather folder, the one Roland had marked with a red string. She opened it on the table between them. Inside were newspaper clippings, wanted circulars, and handwritten notes in her husband's careful script. Jimmy Shelton's photograph stared up from 3 different territories, each with a different name underneath. "My husband kept excellent records," Tessy said. "He believed in knowing exactly who was working the territory. You've been quite busy, Mr. Shelton. Fraudulent claims in Carson City, forged deeds in Leadville, and that business in Sacramento, well, that one almost got you hanged. Jimmy's jaw tightened. The charming surveyor vanished, replaced by something harder, more calculating. He stood slowly, hands visible, and Tessy noticed his eyes flicking toward the door, measuring distances, calculating odds. That's when his gaze landed on the wooden crate behind her, and every calculation in his head stopped cold. "Don't move." Jimmy's voice came out barely above a whisper, but the terror in it made Tessy's blood run cold. His face had gone white as January snow, eyes locked on something behind her shoulder. "Tessy, I need you to listen very carefully. Don't turn around, don't shift your weight, don't even breathe heavy." Tessy's fingers tightened on the edge of the table. "What are you talking about?" "That crate you've been leaning against all morning." Jimmy took a slow step backward, hands raised like he was approaching a wild animal. "When did it show up?" "Yesterday evening. I thought one of the supply wagons left it. Why does it—" "It's not supplies." Jimmy's voice cracked. "That's dynamite. I've seen this setup before. Nolan Sprague's signature. He plants the explosives, waits for the property owner to trigger it, then claims the land after the accident. You've been standing 3 feet from enough powder to turn this cabin into kindling." The room tilted. Tessy felt her heartbeat in her throat, in her fingertips, behind her eyes. She'd been leaning against that crate for over an hour, using it as a backrest while she drank her coffee and waited for Jimmy to finish his con. She'd even bumped it twice when she got up to pour more coffee. "How do I—" Her voice shook. "How do I move without—" "Slow, very slow. Weight forward first, then step away from it like you're walking on river ice." Jimmy positioned himself near the door, ready to run or catch her if she fell. The trigger's usually pressure-based or tied to movement. If it hasn't gone off yet, we might have time. Tessy shifted her weight forward inch by agonizing inch. Sweat ran down her spine despite the cool mountain air. She took one step, then another, until she was clear of the crate and standing in the middle of the room, shaking so hard her teeth rattled. Jimmy exhaled like he'd been holding his breath underwater. "We need to talk about Nolan Sprague, and we need to do it fast. If this story has you on the edge of your seat, subscribe now so you don't miss what happens next, because things are about to get much more dangerous." They stood on opposite sides of the room, the dynamite crate between them like a sleeping beast neither dared disturb. Jimmy spoke first, and for once, there was no charm in his voice, just exhaustion. 3 months ago in Park City, I was working a claim scam at the Silver King mine. Small stuff, forged assay reports, nothing that would get anyone killed. He ran a hand through his hair. I saw Nolan Sprague walk into Judge Carmody's office with a bottle of whiskey and a smile. 2 hours later, Dutch was dead in an alley with a knife in his ribs. Sprague called it a robbery. I knew better because I'd been in Dutch's office that afternoon. I took his field journal, the one where he documented every claim Sprague had stolen, every accident that wasn't an accident, every body that ended up convenient. Tessy's hands stopped shaking. Where's the journal now? Hidden. Safe. I've been running ever since because Sprague knows I have it, knows I can hang him with it. Jimmy's eyes met hers. I came here to make fast money and disappear to California. I didn't know your husband was one of Sprague's victims, too. Roland wasn't investigating mining claims, Tessy said quietly. He was investigating Nolan Sprague. He'd connected 4 deaths across the territory, all property owners who refused to sell, all ruled accidents. He was going to the territorial governor with evidence when someone put stones in his pockets and threw him in the Jordan River. A knock at the door made them both freeze. Tessy moved to the window and saw the telegraph boy from Heber City holding an envelope. She took it with shaking hands, tipped him, and waited until he rode away before opening it. Her face went pale as she read. "What is it?" Jimmy asked. "It's from the assay office in Park City. Sprague was asking about my property 2 days ago, about whether I had any hired help." She looked up at Jimmy. He knows you're here. The message says he's riding this way with 3 men. They'll be here by nightfall." Jimmy and Tessy stared at each other across the deadly space between them, and an unspoken understanding passed between Grifter and Widow. Alone, they were both dead. Together, they might have a chance. "We run the biggest con either of us has ever pulled," Jimmy said, pacing the cabin like a caged wolf. "And we do it in 6 hours. Tessy moved to her husband's desk and pulled out a territorial map, spreading it across the table away from the dynamite. "The Ontario Mine, outside Park City. It's been abandoned for 2 years, but the tunnels are still stable. Roland surveyed it before he died." "Perfect." Jimmy's mind was already working, that con artist brain spinning possibilities. Sprague can't resist a gold strike. It's like throwing meat to a starving dog. We spread word through every saloon and assay office between here and Park City that a surveyor stumbled onto a vein worth millions. We make it sound desperate, like I don't know what to do with it, like I need partners fast. "And when he shows up?" Tessy asked. "We give him exactly what he's been doing to everyone else, a mining accident. Except this time, the law will be waiting." Jimmy looked at her hard. "But we need leverage. We need someone official who'll believe us and move fast." Tessy reached for her coat. "U.S. Marshal Clayton Boone. He worked with Roland on a cattle wrestling case 2 years ago. He's honest, which makes him rare, and he's been trying to build a case against Sprague but never had enough evidence." "I've got the evidence. Dutch Carmody's journal documents everything." Jimmy grabbed his hat. "I'll offer it to the marshal in exchange for immunity on my warrants. It's worth the trade if it puts Sprague in a noose." They rode hard for Salt Lake City, stopping first at the marshal's office where Jimmy laid out his offer. Boone studied the journal for 10 minutes, his jaw getting tighter with each page. He agreed. Immunity for Jimmy, deputies positioned at the Ontario mine, and a trap that would finally end Nolan Sprague's reign. Then came the real work. Jimmy and Tessy split up, hitting every gathering place in the territory. Jimmy played the nervous surveyor at the saloons, letting information slip to the right ears. Tessy visited the assay offices, asking carefully crafted questions that would reach Sprague by sunset. By the time they rode for Park City, the bait was set. Now they just had to survive long enough to spring it. The Ontario mine sat like a black mouth in the hillside, timber supports weathered gray as tombstones. Evening was falling fast over the Wasatch Range, painting the mountains in shades of purple and gold that would have been beautiful if Tessy's heart wasn't hammering against her ribs like a prisoner trying to escape. Marshal Boone and 4 deputies were positioned in the upper shafts, hidden behind old ore carts and timber stacks. Tessy crouched behind a support beam near the main tunnel, her husband's revolver heavy in her hand. She'd never shot anyone before. She wondered if tonight would change that. Jimmy stood at the mine entrance, lantern in hand, playing his role, the nervous grifter who'd stumbled onto fortune and didn't know what to do with it. But in the fading light, Tessy could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his free hand stayed close to the pistol tucked in his belt. "Why are you doing this?" Tessy asked quietly, her voice barely carrying across the space between them. "You could have run, taken your immunity deal, and disappeared to California like you planned." Jimmy was silent for a long moment, staring out at the darkening valley below. "I watched my father die in a mine collapse when I was 12. Company called it an accident. Everyone knew the foreman had ignored safety complaints for months. Nobody did anything because the foreman had money and my father was just another miner." He turned to look at her. "I told myself I'd never be the kind of man who looks away when someone with power crushes someone without it. Then I spent 15 years becoming exactly that man, just with better clothes and smoother words." "You're here now," Tessy said. "Yeah, here, waiting to get shot by a killer, with a widow I tried to rob, and a marshal who'd hang me tomorrow if this goes wrong." Jimmy laughed, but there was no humor in it. My father would probably say I'm finally doing something right. Tessy started to respond, but Jimmy raised his hand. In the distance, the sound of approaching horses echoed through the canyon. Sprague was coming. Want to know if they survived the night? Subscribe now because the next part will leave you breathless. 4 riders emerged from the dust like shadows given form. Nolan Sprague rode in front, a thick-shouldered man with a beard like iron wire and eyes that calculated profit in every direction. 3 hired guns flanked him, men who wore violence as comfortably as their gun belts. Jimmy stepped forward, lantern raised, playing nervous perfectly. "Mr. Sprague, I got your message. I wasn't sure if you'd—" "Show me the vein." Sprague's voice was flat, businesslike. He dismounted without taking his eyes off Jimmy. "And explain why a 2-bit grifter suddenly knows more about geology than he does about marked cards." Jimmy's smile flickered, but he held it. "Sometimes luck finds a man whether he deserves it or not. The gold's in the back tunnel, deeper than the old company dug. I hid it while hiding from—" He caught himself. "While surveying the structure." Sprague nodded to his men, and they moved toward the mine entrance. But as they passed the threshold, Sprague stopped. His eyes swept the shadows, the timber supports, the carefully arranged debris. Tessy's breath caught in her throat. He knows. "Fresh boot prints," Sprague said quietly, pointing to marks in the dust that led to the upper shafts. 8, maybe 10 men came through here in the last few hours. He turned to Jimmy with a smile colder than winter stone. "You think I survived this long by being stupid?" In one fluid motion, Sprague pulled a canvas satchel from his saddle and held it up. Even from her hiding spot, Tessy could see the red wax-coated sticks bundled inside. More dynamite. "Everyone out," Sprague called into the darkness, "or I blow the entrance and bury you all like rats." Marshal Boone stepped from the shadows, rifle raised. "It's over, Sprague. Drop the dynamite and surrender." Sprague's laugh echoed off stone walls. He pulled a match from his pocket. Then, gunfire erupted like thunder in a bottle, and the mine became hell. Muzzle flashes lit the mine like lightning, turning everything into snapshots of chaos. One of Sprague's men went down immediately, caught by Marshal Boone's rifle. Another dove behind an ore cart, returning fire blindly. The confined space turned every gunshot into a cannon blast that rattled Tessy's teeth. Sprague struck the match. The tiny flame glowed orange in his palm, inches from the dynamite fuse. His eyes found Jimmy's across the tunnel, and he smiled. "If I can't have the territory, nobody can." Jimmy stood frozen at the mine entrance. 10 feet to his left was open air, freedom, the escape he'd spent 15 years perfecting. Every instinct in his grifter's heart screamed at him to run. The law would handle Sprague. Tessy would be fine. He'd done his part, delivered the evidence, set the trap. Nobody could blame him for surviving. He took one step toward the entrance. Then he thought about his father, crushed under rock because someone chose profit over people. He thought about Dutch Carmody bleeding in an alley, about Roland Hartfield with stones in his pockets, about Tessy, who'd lost everything but refused to run. Jimmy turned and charged. He hit Sprague like a freight train, driving his shoulder into the bigger man's chest. They crashed to the mine floor in a tangle of limbs and fury. The lit match flew from Sprague's hand, landing in the dust 6 feet away. The dynamite satchel scattered across the ground. Pain exploded in Jimmy's ribs. He looked down and saw blood spreading across his shirt. One of Sprague's men had shot him, but Jimmy's momentum had already carried them both to the ground. He kicked the nearest stick of dynamite away from the burning match just as Marshal Boone's deputies swarmed in. Tessy fired twice from her position, dropping the shooter who'd hit Jimmy. The remaining gunman threw down his weapon, hands raised high. Sprague writhed under Jimmy's weight, screaming threats and curses as the deputies dragged him up and clamped iron shackles on his wrists. The match burned down to nothing and went out. Jimmy collapsed, bleeding but alive, and felt Tessy's hands on his face. 2 weeks later, Jimmy sat in Tessy's Salt Lake City office, ribs wrapped so tight he could barely breathe deep. The bullet had cracked a rib but missed everything vital. The doctor said he was lucky. Jimmy figured luck had nothing to do with it. He was waiting for Marshal Boone to arrive with the warrant. Immunity covered the evidence he'd provided, but there were still a dozen other territories with paper on him. Fraud, forgery, theft. A man couldn't outright his past forever, and Jimmy had stopped trying. The door opened, but it wasn't the marshal. Tessy walked in carrying a leather folder, the same kind her husband had used for his files. She set it on the desk between them and sat down. "I've been going through Roland's mining operations," she said. 3 active claims, 2 in development, and enough legal complications to keep a lawyer busy for years. Turns out my husband was better at finding ore than managing criminals who wanted to steal it. Jimmy nodded, unsure where this was going. "I need someone who understands how thieves think. Someone who knows every con, every scheme, every way to spot fraud before it costs me everything Roland built." She slid the folder across the desk. "The job pays honest wages. You'd work under my supervision. One wrong move, one hint of the old Jimmy Shelton, and Marshal Boone gets a telegram. But if you're serious about going straight, this is your chance." Jimmy stared at the contract like it might bite him. "You're offering me a job after I came to rob you?" "You took a bullet when you could have run," Tessy said quietly. "That counts for something." Jimmy picked up the pen with a shaking hand. 15 years of grifting across the West, and this moment terrified him more than any of it. But he signed his real name, not an alias, not a false identity, his real name. Outside the window, the Wasatch Mountains stood permanent and solid against a sky so blue it hurt to look at. For the first time in his life, Jimmy Shelton didn't plan his escape. If this story moved you, subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And tell me in the comments, would you have taken the honest road or kept running?
If you enjoyed this latest story on life in the old Wild West, then I'm sure you will love the next one coming up. Like, share, and subscribe to our channel so you can get updates on time. Did I tell you we post new, exciting, heartwarming stories daily? Subscribe now to join us so you won't miss any new stories.